So, non-combat related PTSD is a really hard subject. It's something that I find difficult to talk about publicly because there's so many people that have been in so much worse or witnessed so much more. So, I guess the starting point is the build up of the military, sort of where we come from, what we were broken down to become, and what we'll build back up to become. So, that readiness of that always feeling like something could or will go wrong, especially in a training environment where you know and you've been doing it for years, where you stand by, you wait, something's happened, then you react. That's probably not a normal workplace for most people, but it is for a lot of first responders and a lot of military. So it's a really difficult situation to be in to start with. So everyone will get to that point where they're constantly on edge, which is characteristically a symptom of PTSD, but it's also characteristically a symptom of defense or the job that you're in. So that's factor number one. The other one is, especially in humanitarian aid roles or disaster relief or peacekeeping, peace monitoring, peace processes, you will be in situations where you may not directly be involved in a direct threat of death, but you will be aware that it's around you. So some of the people that I met were people that had lost friends, been shot, been killed people, or been in situations where they thought it was all over. I think in any real world industrial natured job, the likelihood of having a near-death experience over a 20-year period is probably high. So add that into war-ravaged zones or conflict areas, or even areas with a lot of refugees, that chance increases again. So a normal work career or work life can result in near-death experiences and an adjustment to a life that's outside of the norm, where you are unconsciously expecting something to happen and to be able to react to it. So there's a combination of things that all add up. Now, with meeting the people that have been through the trauma, the fights, or like the real incidents, you can meet them time and time again and get to a point where you start absorbing some of their pain, and that's just natural empathy, right? And when I was in hospital, we asked the psychologists often, well, like, how can they listen to all these stories over and over again and not be affected by it? And I guess ultimately what we came up with is there's the inherent difference is when they're listening to the story, they are in a safe environment. When we're listening to the stories, a majority of the stories, we're not in a safe environment. So there is a lurking alertness within you that you wouldn't have when you're back at home. You know, the alertness that puts you into another level of readiness, where you would never care about your phone bill or not, the kids being late for school or anything like that. You don't care about those things when you're in the vicinity of two armies that are trying to come to peace. You don't care about those things when you're picking people up out of the water that are on the verge of death. You go to that next level. Now, when you're exposed to these things while you're at that alertness, it's not like you're exposed to them in a situation where you have the luxury of having it as a story. It changes the way you think and feel, and it goes into almost a different category of memory, because you've got that heightened emotion while you're hearing a story. It's a confusing and conflicting mental process. So ultimately, where that left me is in a place where I wasn't really impacted that much by things that were actually happening around me, but I was more at a level of alertness when I was learning about the things that were happening. When you're with refugees, when you're at peace talks, when you're at like a border protection anywhere. So I mean, then you add other things. Like in Timor, we had hundreds of people trying to get into our compound. Well, the city was on fire. People were still being killed. In Bougainville, we knew people had been killing each other when we got there, and they were handing over their weapons. So there was that sustained danger, which is very different to imminent death. Now, again, as I said before, if you're in an industrial environment or a military environment, the chances of having a near-death experience are probably pretty high. I witnessed a few and I was in a few, but then that combination of those things change from your level of safety. So you've got your level of safety in a war zone, which is usually quite high, and I can only imagine where that leaves people that are in combat that have that extra layer. But so you've got sustained danger, but then there's the imminent danger that just something's gone wrong, like being in a riot or having a fuel line burst and set alight in an engine room. So these things are all contributing factors. When you go back another layer, you're like at a pub, right? So there's people that are around you that could be in a fight, or so that's probably like pretty relaxed. When you're at a pub, you're not worried about that thing or anything. And then you add another layer on top of that. Say there's a family tragedy. Say you lose your mother or father. Depending on where these things happen chronologically is probably how they're going to affect you psychologically. Because for me, there was a level of safety, like home was safe, work was safe, a war zone was not so safe. That being said, at the time it was relatively safe. Working with refugees is relatively safe, but there's a different mental place where you go, where you prioritize different things. Now, a training environment is safe, but you've been trained almost to go into autopilot, that level of I am ready to go, like you're about to run a marathon or you're about to run a race. And because every training environment there is an incident, that's over years and years and years and years. That's just where you sit. You sit with that anxious feeling and that almost like you're ready to go. You want to be involved in it. If there's a fire, you run in there with multiple numbers and you beat it. If there's a problem at the access point, you run down there and you get there with more numbers and you win. Like that's the way we train for so long. So that becomes ingrained, and then you add a few near-death experiences, and then a few traumatic stories, and then your empathy grows and grows and grows, and then something happens at home. You've all of a sudden lost the ability to feel safe in a war zone. You've then lost the ability to feel safe in a work zone. You've then lost the ability to feel safe at home. You lose a family member at the right time or wrong time. You've lost that safe world, coupled with years and years and years of training of I need to be ready, I need to go. It just gets to a conflicting point where everything can be so built up that it just never ever stops or never goes away. You're always waiting for that next thing, because your safety is gone. So once your safety's gone, you're on that higher edge, which means basically you're in that alert level where you're not worried about the small things because the big things are so important. Where that comes into big problems is when you're supposed to be looking after the kids and you're supposed to get them to school, but in your head you're still at that level of I need to be ready for something serious. What if the house burns down? What if someone breaks into the house? Where's my baseball bat? Where's my fire extinguisher? Like all these things in your head. So how do you get the kids breakfast, or how do you pay your bill on time? And then the added stress of not being able to concentrate properly on these minute tasks, or going shopping and getting the milk, or sitting in an office and making sure that you use the right paper in the printer. Like, who cares about these things when you're in an extra level of alertness? It's it's the ability to create such a ready person that can combat, and still anyone in that situation will still run into the fire, will still run to the access point, they'll still jump into the water and save some. Like, that's what has been built over so many years. The problem is turning that off, and this is where I ran into so much trouble. I couldn't turn it off. So for years I sat in an office in this same environment just waiting for something to happen. I wanted, every time I walked into a shop, I would hope that there would be a robbery or something, so I could click into gear and I could calm that down and go into autopilot, which is where you are when you're in a fire or a fight or something's going on. You've done your training, you know where you are. So you get to smooth, go into it, autopilot, react, and then come out of that, and then you get into that post-trauma area where you're heightened again. But the fact that it doesn't happen means that you're waiting for it to happen for so long. It creates just a problem area where you can't calm it down. Now, this is, like I said, this is for non-combat related PTSD. So the biggest problem I had coming to terms with it is, where do I sit in relation to combat related PTSD? So the people that I was meeting in Bougainville and some of the people I met in Timor, or even the refugees, they had been exposed to the stuff that really, really ultimately affected me, but I was never exposed to it. So the army guys and the police, they're exposed to stuff that really, really affects them. And I'm a layer back from them. How come I've got this failure of my brain and my functionality and my ability to be a father or a man, when some of them are okay? So the problem is realizing for me that it was okay for me to not be okay, because it's how can those guys be okay and me not be okay when it's their trauma, you know? So I can't understand how to fix it, but what I've learned to do is understand what it is, and why it's there. So it's knowing that it's a combination of the way we've been designed within our job, a few near-death experiences, and a few periods of sustained danger, and effectively what that's left me with is a disorder, like an emotional dysregulation, and a problem with some of my memories. Some of my memories don't have timestamps, which means when I get reminded of something, it can send me straight into that emotional state that I was in, like it's happening now, as opposed to remembering it like a story. And I guess that's the biggest confusing factor for most people to understand. And I know this is confusing, but this is probably the best way I can describe non-combat related PTSD, which is just not a, you know, it's I guess it's almost like saying I've got PTSD in a really shameful way, because I don't deserve the treatment I get when other people have been through so much worse. What I found though is so many people are in the same boat, so many people, and I really think that this is part of the stuff that no one's talking about. I don't have a conclusion here. I just wanted to explain what non-combat related PTSD was for me.